Let's spend some time together and I'll show you how to crochet 3 of the cutest plushies from my birdie pattern. My pattern includes instructions on how to make 20 different types of birds. And normally this is when I would show you each one, but I released my pattern in the spring and I've sold them all since then. These are all the ones I loved and kept for myself, but if you want the full pattern, it's available on my website, Ravelry, or Etsy. In my last birdie tutorial, I asked you guys what birds you want to see next, and by far I think the Cockatiel was the most requested, and I loved the Budgies and thought they went along great with him, so I thought they could all be in the same video. We are going to be using a lot of different colors of yarn today, but it's all kind of the same pattern, just with tweaks in the details and the different color changes. Some materials and tools you'll need to make this are a 6.5mm inline crochet hook, a yarn needle and scissors, stitch markers. I am so happy I bought this giant bag. So this will last me at least a month before all of them disappear into the ether. And I'm going to be using 14mm eyes. I'm going to be using ones that I painted myself, but the blanks are a little hard to find, so you could also just use 14mm black eyes if you wanted. Here's the original birdie that I first made when I wrote the pattern, and then the one I show you how to make today, and you can kind of see the difference. So the plan is I'm going to show you how to make the cocktail, and then I'm just going to show you the color changes and the little detail changes to make the budgies. Because I did tweak the pattern a little bit for the yellow budgie and change some colors around, mostly because I have different shades of green now, but also so it could be all one pattern. This is like kind of a no-sew pattern. We're not going to sew any of the body, we're just going to have to sew on the little beak and details. So let's get started with the cocktail. I'm going to try and use as much sparkly yarn as I possibly can today, and also fail at center pulling every single time. So let's start like we always do, make a magic circle, and then a chain 1 to create it. And this is a chain 1 we're going to completely ignore after we make 8 single crochets in the magic circle. I do read my comments sometimes and I see that I go too fast, so I'm going to try and go slower with this video, because I remember what it was like when I first started watching like crochet tutorials and stuff, and always needing the visuals to go along with like the written instructions and the verbal ones. But I hope you guys know that means I'm going to nervous talk throughout the whole video. Okay, so now pull your magic circle tight, and this is the chain 1 we used to create the magic circle that we're going to completely ignore, and we're going to work into the top of the first real single crochet. And we're just going to put 2 single crochets into each stitch, and 2 single crochets together in one stitch is called an increase. For rows 1 to 3, we're basically going to be making a flat circle. So we just did an increase in each stitch, and once we finish row 2, for row 3, we're going to be putting 1 single crochet and then an increase in the increase from the row before, 1 single crochet between the increase, and then an increase on top of the increase. And you might want to be using stitch markers from the beginning. I always just kind of forget or can't find one, but I don't think I'll ever have that problem again. I always place my stitch marker in the last stitch of each row. It's something you're going to want to decide if you want to put your stitch marker in the last stitch of each row or the first stitch, because you want to be consistent so you don't get like messed up and have extra stitches in there. Alright, so now that we're done with the increase rows, it's really easy. We're just going to single crochet around for 3 rows. But you want to be careful not to finish your last stitch, kind of like leave it halfway done, because we're going to change colors. I'm going to play yarn chicken with this sad little scrap of sparkly white yarn. And I just pull through with the new color, then usually make like 1 or 2 stitches, and then I go back and I tie them. I tie everything 3 times, and I always alternate the yarn that I'm like looping with, and that way they're both knotted together and one isn't just knotted around the other, and they'll never come loose. So yeah, now we're just going to single crochet around 1 row with the new color, and surprise, I lost. Half of that wasn't even sparkly white yarn, it was regular white yarn. But hey, I went digging around in my yarn scraps and found a slightly larger ball of sparkly white, and my crochet hook that I lost from the time that I filmed the intro to started crocheting, so it worked out in the end. And when that type of thing happens, I just act like it's a color change, where I don't finish the last stitch and then I pull through with the new color and tie the ends in the back. so it's no big deal. No one's gonna know except you guys. Okay, so the same thing we did with the last row. We're not gonna finish our last stitch because we're gonna change colors again to like a light gray, which will be the body color. And surprise, we're gonna single crochet around again, and you don't have to worry, you can finish the last stitch because we're gonna be using this color for the rest of the bird except for the feet. And because we're working in the round, there will be like a skip on the back of the bird, but because all of these colors are kind of really similar and like levels of saturation, it won't be that big of a deal or noticeable. For row 9, we're gonna go back to doing an increase because this was kind of the bird's head and neck, and now we want to like flare out to the bird's body. So we're going to be doing 2 single crochets and then an increase in the next stitch. So it's kind of like continuing the increase that we were doing on the head. See, it's going to flare out and give the plushie a little bit of shape. And then for the next row, we're going to be adding the wings. And the wings are working in the front loop only. And then for the row after, row 11, we're going to work in those back loops that we left open. But I'll show you a trick using stitch markers that'll make it really easy. Because with fuzzy yarn, it does kind of pull tight and like make those back loops disappear sometimes. So it's best for everyone to just mark it before you even make them, and then you won't have to worry about losing them. Alright, so the first part of row 10 where we're going to be adding the wings is to just single crochet 6. And that'll bring us to the side of the bird. And now we want to place a stitch marker in the back loop only of the next 4 stitches. And it's probably going to be like a little annoying to crochet with like a bunch of stitch markers right next to your hook. But you only have to do it for like the first time until you get how the wings are made, and you won't have to do it again probably. So first just make a slip stitch in the next stitch. That'll be the first one that's marked, and then chain 3. Slip stitch into the next one and chain 3. And slip stitch into the front loop only of the next stitch and chain 3. And then for that last marked stitch in the front loop, we're just going to make a slip stitch. And that makes 1 wing. And you can kind of like zhuzh it around and kind of make it nicer because it gets a little tangled up sometimes like doing chains. But see, we already have the 4 stitches marked that we're going to be working in the next row. So now single crochet 11 to get to the other side of the bird, and we'll add the next wing. I'm going to mark the next 4 back loops with stitch markers so we don't lose them. And then we're going to do the same thing to make another wing. We're going to make a slip stitch and then chain 3, slip stitch in the front loop only for the next one, chain 3, slip stitch in the front loop only, chain 3, make 1 last slip stitch in that last front loop only mark stitch. We did it. Looks great. And they should be basically on either side of the bird. Like if you missed a stitch earlier in the bird or something, I don't know, you don't have to undo the whole thing. You can just move the wing over like 1 stitch, you know, kind of fake it, and it'll be fine. Alright, so row 11, we're gonna basically single crochet around, but work in those marked stitches under the wings. So first single crochet 6, and when you single crochet 6, this is where you should end. Be really careful you don't work an extra single crochet into that slip stitch that makes up the wing, because it'll just throw off your count. So take out the stitch markers, and then now you can kind of see the back loops, and you're going to work 4 single crochets under the wing. And again, just be mindful of that last slip stitch, because when we flip it over to work on the front of the bird again, on the main body, you don't want to try and put a single crochet into that slip stitch. You want to go right into the top of the first real single crochet. And this single crochet counts as the first of 11 that we're going to make to get back over to the other wing. And once we get there, be careful, the same thing. You should end right before the slip stitch, and then flip the wing forward, and you can take out your stitch markers and work 4 single crochets under the wing. And then I know you're tired of hearing it, but be careful of that slip stitch. When you go to work on the front of the bird again, just make sure you're going into the first real single crochet. Having a stitch marker explosion. But yeah, if you accidentally put your hook into the slip stitch, I think you'll notice because it'll be like really hard to put your hook in there, but it could happen, you don't know. And if it does, it's no big deal, it's an easy fix. Alright, so now we made it back and we're on the back of the bird. So just single crochet around for 1 row, and then we can add the feet and stop to add like the face details and everything. Sorry, I think I didn't record that row, but at least it was an easy one I missed. Alright, row 13, adding the feet. So we're going to single crochet 13, and it should bring us right to the front of the bird. But this is a different type of color change that we're going to do. Because for the feet, we want the stitch on the bottom that we're going to work in the next row to be the color of the body. We don't want it to be the color of the feet. So complete the last stitch, and then yarn over with your new color and kind of just hold it on the back with your finger. And then we're going to make our bobble stitch, which is basically just 3 double crochets with none of them finished, all in the same stitch. And then once you do that, I kind of like push on it with the back of my finger to make sure it goes out, and switch back over to the body color and pull through all the loops on your hook. Then we want to put 4 single crochets between the feet and do the same thing. Finish your last stitch and then yarn over with the foot color and make 3 double crochets, none of them finished, all in the same stitch. And then go back, grab the body color, pull through, and then I try and make the next stitch kind of tight and like pull on a little just to make sure the foot is all together. And then something funny about this row, but I thought I'd warn you, this row is going to be a little shorter because we're basically going to put a wing on the bird's bottom to be like a little tail, and we want it to be centered. So we're gonna single crochet 11, but don't be worried when it stops before your stitch marker because it's supposed to be shorter. So you can move your stitch marker over to the new end of the row, and then we're basically just gonna make another wing. And if you wanted to, you could place 4 stitch markers into the back loop only of the next 4 stitches, just like we did before. So just slip stitch into the next stitch, chain 3, slip stitch into the next stitch, chain 3 again, slip stitch into the next stitch and chain 3, and then 1 final slip stitch. And there we go. He's ready to flap away. Alright, but now is a great time to stop and cut this annoying yarn that's been trailing behind me for like a row. And we'll add the sew-on details like his little beak and blush and eyes and all that fun stuff. So I kind of just go up from the middle of the feet to make the beak centered, and I like to sew around 2 rows. And I'm just mindful of the way the yarn looks when I'm sewing, so it looks all like tidy and meaningful. Just kind of like make it look beak shaped. I think I usually always do like 3. And you can use cotton yarn, like how sometimes I use cotton yarn for face details. And I did make a bunch of birds like that until I thought it'd just be fun to use the same colors as like the body and the beak to like tie the whole thing together. But you can do anything that you'd like. So I got this little scrap of yarn from the yellow budgie, and I thought that would look cute over his beak because sometimes I feel like the beak can look a little out of place, and adding a similar color on top of it ties it into the face instead of having it be like something that really stands out and draws your attention to it. Alright, so now The most exciting and dreadful part of the plushie is adding these eyes, because I love painting the eyes. It's so much fun to make them all one of a kind and everything. But oh my god, he looks so derpy. But it'll look better in a second, I promise. Like I was saying, these eyes are awesome, but getting the back on is so hard. I thought I was gonna break my rickety desk getting the back on. But you see, you just have to get it on enough to kind of latch onto the first notch. And I use this awesome tool that was made by one of my favorite crochet artists to help me do it, because it's way too hard. I don't know why they have to do that. Like I said earlier, these 14mm eye blanks are really hard to find. You can't order them from Amazon. At least I haven't found any. But I really enjoyed making the birdies with these, and I have a market coming up in fall, so I think I ordered like 1,000 of them. So hopefully in a month they should be here. And maybe I'll even add like a few packs to my website if you just wanted to buy like a few packs and not order 1,000 of them from China. Anyway, eye rant is over. Moving forward, I'm just adding the blush. I think it's a pretty simple and straightforward technique that I've shown in all of my videos. The only difference is with the cocktail, I'm going to be looping over 2 stitches instead of the normal 1 stitch that I usually do for blush. And as you saw earlier, I was showing the yellow budgie. Instead of doing pink blush, I did blue, and I think it looks really cool. Now is a great time to stop and tie all of your ends, because we're going to do a decrease row and the hole is going to get smaller before we stuff it. So we're just going to go around an invisible decrease, which is pulling up the front loop only from 2 stitches and then making a single crochet, which will turn 2 stitches into 1. But when we reach the tail, it's just silly and frustrating to try an invisible decrease under there. So just make 4 single crochets under the tail and the back loop. You might even have them marked if you use stitch markers. And then I usually stop at this point and stuff the plushie. I always try and make sure that the bottom stays flat, just so he's not like weeble wobbling around. And then you can just continue on with your invisible decrease around. And then after I make each stitch, it's good to kind of like pull your yarn tight, and that'll help make sure that there aren't a bunch of holes, because if you've stuffed it firmly, it might be kind of hard to be like closing it. And pulling it tight will help close those holes. Yeah, so just invisible decrease all the way around until your hole gets small enough where you feel comfortable sewing it closed. I would recommend to get down to like 8 stitches and then sew it closed, because that's kind of what we started with, so it'll be the same. And when we get to the point where we're invisible decreasing under the tail, you'll kind of see why it was easier to just single crochet under there. When I first started making the birds, I kept trying to invisible decrease under there, and it just did create a bunch of holes. So I think it just works better to do the single crochets under there. And now it looks like we're ready to sew it closed, and to do that I just fasten off and then leave a long tail and use my yarn needle to go around. I loop around the front loop only of each stitch and make my way all the way around, and then you can pull it tight and I'll just close it almost like it was a magic circle. And I always just take this time when you have the extra yarn on your hook to go around and, like, if there's any holes or anything like that, to go over them a few times. And then I tie it usually 2 or 3 times and then just hide the knot inside the plushie and cut my ends. Something I feel like is also overlooked is that you can manipulate the stuffing inside the plushie and kind of form the plushie to be any shape that you'd like. Because this plushie is like a super fluid shape, it's not really defined. I mean, we have 1 increase in the middle that kind of makes the neck to the body. You can like loaf it up, like squish it around. You can move the stuffing inside to kind of form more of a head shape and more of a body. Like, you can still change the shape even after it's done. Okay, so moving on to the final bit of the cockatiel pattern is we're going to add this little frilly feather thing to the top of his head. And it's super easy. We're basically just going to surface crochet onto him. So I like to find a spot usually like right between rows 2 and 3, and I insert my hook in between like 2 stitches right in the center of his forehead, and then just make a slip stitch. Pull the ends tight And then we're just going to want to chain 4. And then slip stitch right back into the same stitch. And then I'll just make a little loop. And then you can work your way back and keep doing that to create as many feather frills as you'd like on top of his head. You just slip stitch into a stitch, chain 4, and then slip stitch right back into that same stitch. The only thing I would pay attention to is to make sure you're making it like straight down his head and it doesn't start to go like off to one side or the other. And I usually just do 4 or 5 maybe. You could do any amount that you like. It depends on what you want your bird to look like. I think with the chicken bird in my pattern I did like 3 towards the front of his head in red, kind of to make the little thing on their head. My dad has chickens. I should definitely know what that thing is called. But yeah, then I just pull the ends tight, and I mean it's already slip stitched on. You could tie it if you'd like. And then I hide the ends inside the plushie, and I kind of just alternate the feather frills on top of his head. And I think it looks great. It's called a comb, I remembered. Yay, we finished up the cockatiel and I think they look so cute. Let's move on and I'll show you the color changes for the budgies and the little details that change it to a different bird. So for the blue budgie, I'll list the colors you're going to need on the screen. Color A is the head, color B is the middle color, and color C is the body. And then the same thing for the yellow budgie. I did change this one from the pattern, but just because I have more greens and I felt like it. Okay, so now adding the details, I wait until the bird is completely done to do this. You could do it when we're adding like the beak and stuff. I just like to be sure everything's in the right place and it looks right. I insert my needle to the side and up right where the color changes, and then loop around 3 stitches, kind of going along with the natural flow of the crochet stitches. And then for the other side, I switch directions because I want it to look mirrored. And I do the same thing, just loop around 3 stitches, and then I always go back and end right where I started. That way I can tie the ends together and then just hide the knot inside the plushie. I always take my daughter to the pet store when it's rainy just for something to do, and we always look at the budgies, and you kind of don't notice how beautiful they are until you really look at their feather details up close, and they're just like amazing. I know adding like a little bit of black lines to the plushie doesn't really do it justice, but it is like a cute little detail to add. Well, I hope you guys loved the video and made some super cute birdies, and leave me some comments letting me know which ones you want to see next. I'll probably want to do the next birdie video like fall themed, so maybe a crow or an owl would be really cool to make together. I wanted to take a minute to thank all of my Patreon members for supporting me. It's so cool to have a place to post sneak peeks and previews of patterns that I'm still working on and aren't really completed or ready for the public to see yet, because I appreciate all of your feedback so much on Patreon. And for my last few patterns, all of my pattern testers have been from my Patreon, and it's so cool to actually make connections with people that I recognize their names and their profiles and stuff from Instagram. But Instagram can be like a little overwhelming at times because I don't like to spend too much time on social media, so sometimes it's hard to actually connect with people on there. So I love Patreon. It's so cool to make friends with people who love crocheting as much as I do and love like geeking out about like little specific crochet details and stuff like that together. So thank you to all of my Patreon members for being so awesome, and I hope everyone has a great day. Thanks for watching. Bye.